On January 13, 2006, the police received a distress call about a robbery in progress at Banco Rio in Acasuso, Argentina. A short while later, the bank had been surrounded by the police. Acasuso is a wealthy neighborhood in Buenos Aires, and as expected, the bank had a lot of valuables in their possession. As the authorities continued to set up a perimeter around the two-story building, they saw a man walking out of the bank. The robbers had just set free the bank's only security guard, who walked out of the door holding his unloaded revolver. This security man explained to the cops that there was about 23 hostages inside and 4 robbers. As a show of good faith, the robbers, who appeared to have been trapped in the building, released another hostage. This time, it was a lady. It was very clear that this gang of thieves was ready to negotiate. They continued to give the authorities their terms, and both sides worked on reaching a compromise. The police had invited an established negotiator to secure the release of the remaining hostages. However, the team suddenly went silent in the evening and stopped the negotiation. At exactly 7 p.m., the Buenos Aires Police Special Operations Team, codenamed the Falcons, finally broke into the facility only to get the shock of their lives. There was no commotion, no exchange of fire, and most importantly, no perpetrator. It was as if they all vanished into thin air. To everyone's surprise, none of the hostages had been killed or injured. They were all doing fine, but one thing stood out. Over 150 safety deposit boxes had been broken into, and their contents was nowhere to be found. The police had secured the whole perimeter, and there was no way any of the perpetrators could have escaped without being spotted. How did this team of robbers sneak out of the bank with over 100 special operations team members stationed around the bank? How were they able to execute such a perfect heist that earned the title, the robbery of the century? In this video, we'll walk you through how this team of robbers disappeared under the watchful eyes of the authorities, how they meticulously planned the heist, and how they successfully executed the iconic robbery. Banco Rio, now called Banca Santander Rio, is an Argentinian-based commercial bank and financial institution. The institution has several branches nationwide, including one at Santa Isidro in Buenos Aires, the country's capital. At the time, Argentina was known for its several cases of bank robberies. The country still experienced one that caught the attention of the world. As we see in true crime cases, this robbery was what inspired the Banco Rio robbery. In 1999, just 7 years before the incident, Argentina experienced the Ramallo robbery, which may still refer to as the Ramallo Massacre. This massacre occurred on the 17th of September, 1999, after 3 armed robbers broke into a bank, taking 600 people hostage. After several hours, the culprits tried to escape using the bank manager and an accountant as human shield. By this time, reporters and media agents had gathered around the building, and the whole incident was being live-streamed. You can say the whole world was watching. While trying to hunt down the culprits, a special group of provincial police, GEO, killed one of the culprits and the 2 hostages in the process. This saga was filmed on national TV, so there was no way the police could deny it. The incident shook the country, and the police received a lot of backlash. As a result, when the police learned that the Banco Rio was under attack, they had to be careful with their approach to avoid another Ramallo. They immediately set up a perimeter around the bank and called for a negotiator to secure the release of the hostages. The crew, on the other hand, presented a man named Walter to handle the negotiations. The man, who was briefly seen in a gray suit, was overconfident and didn't appear tense considering the situation. It was clear that he was not scared of the over 200 cops facing him. The police nicknamed Walter the man in the gray suit, and he instantly became an internet sensation. The robbers and the authorities seemed to flow well, and in return, the robbers ensured the hostages were all safe. They even sang a birthday song for one of the hostages when they realized it was their birthday. The employee's phone was buzzing with birthday wishes from family and friends. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, Walter placed a call to the negotiator outside and ordered pizza as the hostages were hungry. He also confessed to the cops that they were exhausted and wanted to surrender. However, they'd like to have one hearty meal before they are whisked away to face the full wrath of the law. However, after this call, Walter went silent, and all efforts to reach him proved abortive. Throughout the day, the authorities discussed strategies to end the siege, but as time went by, the radio silence from the bank left them all in a panic. At exactly 7 p.m., the authorities got tired of the silence and managed to break into the bank. Once they were in the building, they found no trace of the robbers, and it was as though they were never there. The authorities carefully checked the hostages in case the robbers had blended in with them but could not find them. While searching the bank basement, they observed that something was off. It was at this point the authorities realized that the bold robbery was a mere carefully crafted distraction to keep investigators' attention away from a much bigger heist going on underneath the bank. Interestingly, the safe deposit boxes seemed to house more valuables than the bank itself. It was because at this time, Argentinians had lost all hope in the bank system, and there was no way you could blame them for this. The bank actually betrayed them. The most famous one was the one that happened in 2001, when the government restricted access to people's bank accounts and limited their withdrawals to control financial instability during times of economic crisis. Millions of Argentinians were affected by the collapse of the national banking system, better known as the Carralito. Overnight, people lost their fortune, entire savings, and retirement funds. But in all of these, the money and valuables kept in the safe deposit boxes remained intact. Since then, Argentinians lost interest completely in the banking system and began to save their cash, jewelry, and other valuables in safety deposit boxes. The gang of thieves knew this and were determined to strike back and humiliate the banks in the process. The Banco Rio was situated in one of the richest areas of Argentina, meaning the rich men and women in the vicinity likely stored their valuables in the bank. This made the bank the perfect choice for the thieves. The robbers somehow managed to open a huge number of boxes, even though they were not in the bank for so long. Out of 400 reinforced steel safety deposit boxes, the thieves were able to destroy and break into 143 boxes containing cash, gold, rare gems, and any precious stone you can think of. The crew left no evidence behind except a battery pack, which the police assumed they used to break the safety boxes, and a row of toy guns. Yes, the guns the robbers displayed during the heist were toy guns, but they didn't want to leave without taunting the police and the residents of the rich neighborhood. The last item the authorities discovered on the scene was a handwritten note that read, "In a neighborhood of rich people, without weapons or grudges, it's just money, not love." That night, every Argentine was glued to the news and marveled at how a crew could make jest of both the police and the banking industry in broad daylight. Their escape was also the talk of the town, and public opinions and rumors flew left and right. At a point, the public saw the thieves as Robin Hood heroes, except that they forgot to give to the point. There are even chances that some citizens who lost their fortune during the Corralito were glad it reached everybody now. even those who secured their valuables in safety deposit boxes. One thing was clear: the heist was carried out by one of the best teams of robbers. So who was the face and brains behind the heist? And how were they able to carry out such a perfect heist? And most importantly, how did this gang of thieves vanish from the scene without a trace, even with over 200 special operatives surrounding the vicinity? Every crime has that person who meticulously planned everything to the last detail and probably recruited every member of the crew. For the Banco Rio robbery, the mastermind was a man called Fernando Araujo. Araujo was an artist who was living his best life and expressed himself in plastic arts, material arts, and cannabis arts. Aside from these, Araujo constantly engaged himself in an indoor marijuana farm. However, Araujo didn't feel fulfilled with all of these and still had something he longed after: robbing a bank. Araujo was impressed by the Ramallo heist, but was not happy that the robbers ruined it all while escaping from the scene. He soon set out with the goal to execute the best robberies in history and do better than his predecessors. Araujo chose the Banco Rio branch in San Isidro, an affluent part of Buenos Aires, as a target. He planned to dig a tunnel to the building that would lead directly to the bank's underground vaults. While working this plan out, he discovered that there was already an existing sewer tunnel he could use to infiltrate the facility and then break into the bank from underground. To achieve this last part of his plan, he needed an expert. This heist was more than a regular heist. He wanted an artistic robbery, one that would depict skills and creativity, not force. So he wanted a robbery that would wow the world and at the same time leave nobody injured, unlike the Ramallo heist. He began to assemble a team of just a few people to help him achieve this goal. The first member of the crew was Araujo's old friend, Sebastian Bolster, who ran a jet ski club and knew a lot about practical engineering. Convincing Bolster was a piece of cake, as the man was in a deep financial crisis, all thanks to the unstable condition of Argentina's banking system. Bolster was one of the Argentinians who lost their fortune during the Corralito. His grandfather had entrusted a lot of money to the banks and lost it all during the economic turndowns. Even though Bolster, at first, didn't want to carry out the crime because he knew how hard it was to break into banks, he had a wife and a child. Araujo and Bolster soon set to work. They mapped out the entire sewer tunnel in San Isidro, calculating its path toward the Banco Rio branch in the city and building makeshift rooms to break into it. However, the duo had a major challenge they could not solve. There was no way they could avoid triggering the motion sensor alarms in the vaults. It began to look like their plan was impossible. At this point, breaking into the bank was not the problem, but they were likely to see the Ramallo incident play out once again. At this time, the plan was to enter the underground vault at a time when the bank would be closed, steal as many valuables as possible, and then exit the facility using the same route they came in. While this sounded like a perfect crime, there was no way they could bypass the vault's security alarms. Araujo soon realized that there was another way this could play out, by creating a diversion for the cops and a show for Argentinians. The team will achieve the mission's success and at the same time set a new record in the history of bank heists. The new plan was to enter the bank through the doorway like a normal daylight robbery, round up the hostages, and negotiate with the police for their release while the rest of the team broke into the underground vault. Once they were done ransacking the underground vault, they will leave the scene through the tunnel, deceiving the cops who would think they were trapped in the building all along. With this plan starting to make sense, Araujo introduced a man called the Doc to the team. He realized that they needed someone with an impressive criminal history and ties to super gangs. The doc was a perfect fit and had been involved in all kinds of criminal activities. The doc brought Vito della Torre and Luis Mario Vitelli, his associate, into the scheme. Vito was a man who delved into the world of crime from a tender age. It is no surprise that he grew up to be a notorious criminal with experience in how operations are run in the criminal world. Vito had immense physical strength and served as the crew's enforcer. The other associate was a man called Vitelli. He was a Uruguayan citizen who was also in and out of prisons in his country before he fled to Argentina to commit more crimes. Vitelli had a lot of money, and this was his major role in the heist. The crew needed a lot of money to put some things in place in anticipation of the heist. Vitelli generously donated to the cause and ensured they never lacked money while planning the heist. Vitelli invested about $100,000 into the operation. The crew featured another henchman, referred to as the Kid, and someone who served as their getaway driver. During one of the team's brainstorming sessions, Vito's wife, Alicia, walked in on them and got to know about the heist. She reiterated her support and promised to keep the confidential information to herself. At the time, Aruo thought the plan would only take a few months. However, the team had big goals, and as a result, it took them more than a year to carry out the operation. By 2006, the team was ready to hit the bank. On January 13th, 2006, Bolster appeared at the tunnel, very eager, and began digging a hole in the wall of the bank's underground. On the other hand, the rest of the team linked up and drove to Piero Libertado Avenue, where the Banco Richo branch was located. Vito, the doc, and the Kid walked into the building with masks covering their face and guns in their hands. They informed everyone at the bank was under arrest and held everyone hostage and waited for the cops to surround the building. Arujo arrived on the scene a few minutes later. With everyone inside, Vitelli took a hostage out of the front of the building and gestured as if he was scared of the police. This was the crew trying to convince the police that they were trapped and didn't expect the police to secure the scene that quick. Vitelli went back into the bank, posing scared, and locked the bank doors. Vitelli, with another member of the gang, stormed the bank's basement to force the bank's chief of security to open the door. Vitelli promised the security man that nobody would harm him if he could open up the doors. They also had a hostage who pleaded with the man to do as the robber wished. Vitelli kept his side of the bargain and didn't inflict any injury on him when he came down. This was all part of the plan. They needed to build trust. The gang set free the bank's only security guard after emptying the weapons and placing its bullets in his pocket. They had kept behind the man's cell phone and waved at the cops to call the phone so negotiations would begin. The authorities believed the robbers were trapped and had no way of escaping the building, so they called for an experienced negotiator and listened to their demands, hoping to see how the situation could be resolved amicably. The cops spoke with Vitelli throughout the encounter and could see him on the second floor wearing a gray suit. The man in the gray suit, as he is now called, pretended as if he was trying to cut a deal with the authorities so his crew could be free. Meanwhile, in reality, he was simply doing his part of the plan. The standstill was a scheme to buy more time for the rest of the crew who were about to steal the money. While Vendetti was busy negotiating with the authorities, the rest of the crew had secured the parking area and were setting up the machine Bolster had built to break into the underground vault locker. During the preparations for the heist, Bolster realized that cracking safe boxes was no easy job. Moreover, they needed to crack many in a short amount of time, meaning they needed a tool that was fast, powerful, and most importantly, quiet. If the cops were to hear drilling noises and discover their real mission, They were done for. So he went to another branch of Banco Rio and requested to rent a safety box. He took note of the brand and got some boxes to figure out the best way to break into them. After several futile efforts, he finally found an option that was fast, powerful, and quiet, which required him to build a special jackhammer with ample force to punch through the locks. He called this tool a power cannon. Once the tool had been assembled, he set to work and began opening as many as he could, tossing the valuables into a bag. Remember that Araujo wanted the heist to be a form of art? So his plan was not to steal all the valuables in the safety boxes. He gave the team a deadline of 2 hours, and they agreed to leave with anything they looted till the time. Aside from treating the heist as a kind of art, leaving the scene as soon as they could was a smart move. This was because the longer they spent at the bank, the closer the cops are to figuring out their real mission, which would ruin everything. Vitete managed to hold the authorities off for 2 hours without raising suspicion. He was confident, not overconfident, to raise an eyebrow, and was careful with his choice of words. He sold the line to them, and they all bought it without thinking twice. Araujo signaled to Vintetti that time was up, and it was time for the gang to move on. Vintetti played his last and told the cops that the crew would love to surrender, but before they do, they'd like to have a last hearty meal. So he ordered pizza for the team and asked them to bring it. The authorities thought they were close to a breakthrough and began working on getting the pizza and getting it across. But the gang of thieves were already planning to leave the bank using boats, specifically inflatable Zodiacs. But they had one issue. The storm canal was not deep enough to carry people loaded with money. Bolster anticipated this and built a dam to inflate the water depth. However, the team still wanted their exit to be top-notch. They didn't want a situation like the Ramallo heist, where the exfil ruined the carefully executed heist. So Bolston figured out that if the authorities were to discover that the crew was escaping using canals, they would assume that the team would exit through the river. So the best move was to go in the opposite direction. The team decided to flee using the canals, but went deeper into the dark and smelly canals. They already had a diver patiently waiting for them, while the cops were still at the bank dealing with the tense situation, not knowing that the culprits were just a mile away. When the police arrived with the crew's last supper, there was no response from the man in gray. The police waited for hours before infiltrating the building, since they didn't want another Ramallo. By the time they barged into the building, the crew was already in their various homes counting their personal share of the loot. While exiting the bank, the crew splashed chlorine throughout the bank to cover their DNA and tossed random strands of hair to throw off crime scene investigators. Then they escaped into their tunnels and the sewer without a trace, except for some booby traps, which they intentionally placed at certain locations to taunt the cops. Even though the media reported that the thieves went away with cash and valuables worth about $20 million, the exact figure was never known and still remains unmentioned to date. The police had no clue about the perpetrators. The crew had split up the loot and planned to never cross each other's path again. However, some weeks after the robbery, Beto observed that some of his share had gone missing, and it was no small amount. We're talking around $300,000. He soon realized that the money was taken by his 18-year-old wife, Alicia Di Tullio, who maintained that it was her right to spend it. The couple got into a serious altercation, which forced Alicia to inform the authorities about Beto being one of the guys who executed the famous Banco Rio robbery and identified Araujo, Bolster, Beatty, and Zalo Chiviera. Acting upon her statement, the police arrested Beto, whom they found $700,000 in his possession. A few days after Vito's arrest, Olsto was detained in Vito Gesell. He instantly confessed to the crime during questioning. However, they couldn't find any cash after his initial raids. Araujo was found in the hills of San Juan by soldiers and the Argentinian National Army after he moved to the rural area thinking it would help him stay invincible. They all received sentences between 10 and 15 years, but didn't spend that much in prison. Since the crew used toy guns and the cops couldn't prove that they used real firearms, their sentences were reduced and they left prison early. The doc and the kid were never identified and simply vanished, and so did the great part of the money.